Hey everybody, this is Chuck here for DeucesCracked.com, coming at another episode of Beginning Omaha 8. This week, we're going to take our first look at some flop play in Omaha 8 or better. In this video, we're going to examine some Omaha 8 or better flops. By that I mean we're going to look at flops, particularly within the context of 08 and how those flops interact with our pre-flop ranges. Then we're going to take a little bit of a look into flop equity. What does flopped equity look like in Omaha 8 or better, and how should we try to use that to our advantage? And finally, I want to wrap up kind of in that same theoretical way I like to do, talking a little bit about how our pre-flop play is preparing us for the flop. Now, the first question we really need to answer is what is a good hand on the flop? Omaha 8 or better is a 4-card game, right? We can see here everyone, even our buddy UTG there, has 4 cards, which means the average strength of your hand on the river needs to be a lot stronger. I think there's a pretty significant overlap between the Limit Hold'em community at the time I'm publishing this video and the Omaha 8 or better community. And I think often the Limit Hold'em community can kind of take for granted their comfort with top pair, and maybe don't realize how much more of a hand you might need, and how much more important it is to understand how turn and river runouts can affect what our hand is going to be on future streets. So when we're saying what's a good hand in Omaha 8 or better, we're not just thinking in terms of what do we have right now on the flop, right? We're thinking in terms of what are we going to have on the river, and how likely is that to be the best hand, or how much, specifically in 08, how much of the pot is that going to be worth, right? That's something good to think about in terms of like maybe naked overpairs on low boards, right? As happy as I am to have kings on a 7-8-3 rainbow in Hold'em, where do I fare in an 08 game in terms of how much of the pot is my hand going to be worth on the river? And that's really what comprises a good hand. So what we're going to do now is take a look at some flops and kind of break down how they work specifically in 08. And then I'm going to just change like a couple of cards just so we can kind of enumerate a couple of more board textures. I want to make you comfortable with flop scenarios, kind of learn how to read a flop, what that flop should mean for other players in the game. And from there, we can kind of build our expectations for actions, because in any time you're trying to learn a new game, the more you kind of familiarize yourself with what other players might have and what might happen, the easier it's going to go. So let's just start right here with 10-4-5. With a spade flush draw. Now, there's a lot I could say about this board texture in particular, but I'm actually pretty excited to kind of sum it all up in one phrase. It's a very coordinated board. Now, I think I could just say that and go on to the next bullet point. It wouldn't matter much, but I wouldn't leave myself to flair for the dramatics. But in reality, we are trying to think of this board texture in terms of the context of Omaha 8 or better. Now, players are not folding basically any combination of ace 2-3 in general. And what does that mean for this board texture? That means all of those possible hands, all of those ace 2 8-9 rainbows and ace 2-2-7 with 3 diamonds are not letting go of their hand on this board texture. In other words, this board texture is very, very good for 08. Right? If you think of Hold'em in a 2-3-4 board and compare that to an 8-9-10, we would obviously expect a lot more action on an 8-9-10 because it's more reasonable for a player to have a jack or a queen or a 10 than it is for someone to have a 5 or a 6. And in that right, this board texture is very coordinated in terms of 08. Now, on a board texture like this, in a 4-card game, how do made hands fare? Now, let's just start with a basic hand, right? If I have a set here, there are some very, very good, strong strong draws our opponents could have that we'd be flipping against. We wouldn't necessarily be loving our hand. Now, let's add the next element to that. This is Omaha 8 or better. half the pot can be going to a low hand at all points in times. In other words, for me to be having a naked high hand here, what I have on this board texture needs to be a lot stronger. In particular, when I see a board texture like this, I immediately think of a hand under the BBWW category, Broadway, wheel, of course, like a King Jack or a King Queen 4-5. Hands like that on this board texture really have little to no room. I'm not saying I would immediately fold them, but a huge mistake I would expect to see on occasion would be a player maybe raising or jamming with a hand like that because I flopped 2 pair. You know, that's kind of a coming over from Hold'em 101 mistake in a 4-card game. But in Omaha 8 or better, it's even worse because now there can be low draws in there as well. When you find yourself in that situation where you have a made high hand and your opponent has a lock on the low with a draw to a better high, you are officially being free rolled. That's a huge mistake. So in general, on a board texture like this in a 4-card game, made hands are just not going to be that excellent because there's so many draws and there's so much that can happen. It's even more so as we go on to Omaha 8 or better. So what should we expect then is the real question. Well, it's kind of right in front of us, right? This is a very coordinated board texture. Made hands don't fare very well. We should really be expecting a lot of action on this board texture. We should expect a decent number of hands that could jam, maybe some hands that inappropriately jam, which is something you'll see a lot in Omaha 8 too. 6-7 of spades is an open-ended straight flush draw. But King Queen 6-7 with the 6-7 of spades, twice. There's 2 cards that can give you a straight flush. On both of those, you will not scoop, very likely. And more importantly, on the rest of the times you make a flush, you only have a 7-high flush. And if there's another player in there jamming with you, you can have, you can be up against a hand like Ace-2 of spades. And we're not really looking to play those middling cards anyway, but in other words, this is a very coordinated board texture where I'm expecting a lot of action. I'm expecting a lot of players to call. And I'm excited about that with even some of the weaker hands, even though a hand like Ace, King 10-3 isn't necessarily crushing this board texture. In a lot of situations, when I know I'm still getting called by all those junky hands our opponents decided to play, their Ace-6s and their other bad 6-7s and their 3-6s and their 2-6s and things like that, I'm excited to bet and get called. But when I completely whiff or when someone does put some money on this board texture, I'm expecting it, A, to be a pretty decently strong hand, and B, for there to potentially be a lot more action down the road. So let's make some changes to this board texture. The first one kind of subtle, and then as I change 2 cards, obviously things are going to be kind of dramatically different. But on a 10-4-5 board texture, I kind of went on a little bit of a rant there about how coordinated this board is, how often we can probably expect players to call. Let's make one change and change the 5 of spades to the 7 of diamonds. So what happened here? The board got a lot less coordinated, but it didn't necessarily gain much more fold equity. That may be a foreign concept, the idea of a board having fold equity. And by that, I really mean how much fold equity do we have on that board texture, right? Technically, since the flop comes down, I like to think of it as the flop giving me fold equity. What's really changed here is the average strength of hand on this board texture is probably down a little. Well, that's not what I would say. The number of jammable hands, so to speak, on this board texture is down, right? There's less flush draw plus straight draw combinations. Keep in mind, again, with the 4-card game, we can have Ace, Queen of spades with the 2 and 3 of hearts. And that's enough for us to have wrap plus nut flush draw. But here, there's no flush draw out there. Players are probably going to be more comfortable with 2-pair hands. Now, a 4-7 here is still very bad. I would be very excited to have 4-7 or even the 4-5 with my ace 2, by the way. So let's just throw that out there. That's a good piece. That's a scoop draw, right? I can make a boat and I can make a low as well. That's a good hand. But 4-7's certainly faring a lot better here. It's nowhere near a hand strong enough I'm excited to put money in with, right? Particularly when I'm talking about these bottom two pairs, and I'll probably just stop addressing them at this point, because we need to be thinking in terms of what our other two cards are at all points when we're thinking about what our absolute hand is on the flop. So while I am talking about 4-7, again, we need to find two cards we can reasonably hold that we would actually consider playing with 4-7. Right? We're not going to worry about how to play 9-9-4-7 from the big blind when it's limped 6 ways and we take a flop. I mean, you're going to check and fold, but honestly, who cares? But we're more concerned with, a raising or cold calling. In most of those spots, when we have those two pairs, we've either got a gut shot or a low to go with it, or a live low. But anyway, to summarize here, I don't mean to go on. This board texture, while it doesn't present as many jamming opportunities, it does not allow. I mean, it does still have a lot of hands that can peel here. There's still a low draw. People can have pairs. In fact, there's plenty of bad draws to go along with it, right? 8-9s, Jack-9s, Jack-8s. There's some more high-end garbage, so to speak, that can go in here. There's a lot of peelable hands on this board texture. This is the kind of board texture that the more you play, this will kind of become your bread and butter. And obviously so, right? Because most of the other ones, hands are going to kind of play themselves sometimes. Speaking of which, let's change that 4 of spades, the 9 of hearts. What changes here? Well, first off, there's still a backdoor low on the board, which is something of note. I was talking just earlier about how you can't think of your hands in terms of just 2 cards, and I think it's actually a pretty big mistake a lot of players make, because they'll say, oh yeah, not too many backdoor low type hands could reasonably be calling here. But if you think about it, to have a naked backdoor low on this board texture would be non-ace included, of course, would be 2, 3, 4, 5. Because ace 2, 3, 4, ace 2, wheel, or something to that effect. Usually would be some kind of preflop action. We can kind of pick that hand out. But anytime you start including anything north of that and you have a 6 in there, there's some gut shots on here. But in general, this board texture, in terms of 08, really does not favor us much as an early position preflop raiser. Not the kind of board texture I'm really expecting much fold equity on, though. If you kind of put the piece together from my little talk there on backdoor low potential and the fact that players are not folding like their 5-6s and things like that. This is actually a board texture where I'm expecting to get called a ton, and one where I'm not going to have much equity on at all. This is probably one of the worst board textures for a lot of our opening hands. Obviously, we can flop very well here, but this is the kind of flop where if I did open, ace 2, 3, queen with all black cards, I would probably feel fine with just checking. I would certainly feel fine with just checking when there are multiple callers. So all red, think of stop sign of sorts. But when the board texture like this just doesn't really allow for much to happen with some complete misses, it could be a good time to just kind of slow down. Okay, on to the next flop here. We've kept the 9 in the middle, but now we've got an ace 9-7 rainbow board texture. So let's talk a little bit about a flop like this. What's different on a flop like this versus comparing mainly to our 10-4-5 suited board texture. The first thing, and something that will, the more you play Omaha8 or better, kind of continue to be a little bit awkward, is pairing your ace. Believe it or not, it is a game where, as much as you always want an ace in your hand, it's not uncommon for you to be frustrated when you actually pair your hand. Now, triple X goes along with our ace there. Some players like to look at situations like this and think, well, yeah, ace 2 finally paired up. Maybe I can put them in a weird spot. Maybe I want to jam my 2-3. Well, if we think specifically in terms of our pre-flop raising range from early position, it's not too uncommon for us to have an ace and some combination of wheel cards to go with our opening. There are 3 cards that go with our hand. Again, thinking of hands in terms of just 2 cards is a very, very dangerous mistake. So we can't remove ace, king, 2, 3 from our opponent's hand, or a hand like ace, 2, 3, 6, which is not great, but hey, that 6 is now suddenly a really good card. You have some scoop runouts, which improves. That being said, this is the kind of flop where I want to keep my eyes peeled for a player who raised pre-flop and then decided to check. Maybe they do have some sort of ace-2 Broadway combination. That's the kind of thing players are somewhat consistent with too, so I'm definitely quick to make a note mentally and physically if you are playing online or who knows. Of course, when we take these flops, we can't think of it just pessimistically, right? There's simply less opportunity on this board texture to flop that well, which means we should be more excited about our ace plus decent low combinations. Our ace Broadway kicker plus decent low combinations are in very good shape on a board texture like this, right? Even the players that are hoping to get lucky with their 8-10s and 6-8s and 5-6s are in good shape when we're going to be able to lock up half the pot with our low on the bottom end. A lot's going to change on this board texture very quickly. So that's something to keep your eye on, right? Think of the 8 of spades on the turn, or the queen of diamonds on the turn, or pairing the ace or pairing the 9, or even just a 2 or a 3, how things can change very quickly, specifically in the context of maybe someone who is used to jamming a nut low draw and they check raise and now the 2 has paired. These are things we're looking out for on this flop as well. So in general, what should we really expect on a board texture like this? Well, I kind of hinted at it there. The idea of someone maybe trying to be aggressive with a naked nut low draw. Now, the lack of strong draws present on the flop should yield a little bit more comfort with some made high hands. Maybe someone jamming an ace 9 or an ace 7 if someone was to raise. In other words, this is the kind of board texture where the dryness kind of makes aggression a little bit irrational, right? There's just less hands that make sense in terms of what you should be jamming here. So this is kind of a flop where I maybe get a little bit stubborn on, and a flop where I assume other players do as well, right? That's the reason why I'm willing to a little bit there. So certainly one we're going to be planning for a lot of turn cards on. Okay, so in the same way we changed one card in the board texture last time, let's do it again, but this time in a bit of a different direction. Let's change this 9 to the 8 of clubs. So now a lot has changed. Obviously, we've put some better straight draws out there, some more jammable hands, right? Anytime we see low possibility plus suitedness plus connectedness, we can immediately see some alarm bells going off that someone may want to be putting a lot of money in on this board texture very soon. But the big difference here, now that ace X has paired, okay? This is the kind of board where some hands like the king high flush draw are going to be pretty tricky to play, right? We want to make sure that we're going to be able to navigate ourselves to the river, okay? We want to have a pretty decent read on what other players are jamming, and we want to be able to comfortably act should the board pair and someone put some money in. The better read I have in that situation, the better. It's also important to keep in mind the price we're getting, because while we're drawing, we're actually drawing to half the pot. We'll talk a little bit about that kind of mental trick that goes on there a little bit, but keep in mind here that if I have the king, queen of clubs, and it goes bet, call, raise, raise, if I'm calling to draw, I'm calling to draw to half the pot. And blockers are a very real thing. There's only 13 clubs in the deck. 2 of them are on the board. We're down to 11. 2 of them are in my hand. We're down to 9 remaining. A bet and a raise. Some portion of that range is going to be made low plus club draw. So now what am I drawing to? 6 to 5 outs for half the pot as well. So this is the kind of board texture where you can't let that really blind you right out the gate. And one where I'm expecting a lot more action. I kind of hinted at, the kind of not as threatening of a board texture on the ace 9-7. A lot more action can happen on a board like this. And now let's kind of move it to the next board texture shift, which would be pairedness. Here, we've still got that flush draw and low draw aspect to it, but there's no made low draw here. Now, drawing to a club flush draw when the board is already paired, again, is a pretty cautious endeavor. And this is a situation where I feel like with a bet and a raise in front of you, I'm not even considering continuing with just like a naked king high flush draw and no other help, because A, I'm not closing the action, and B, it's a very real possibility that if when I make my flush, my hand is not best. Now, conversely, this doesn't mean that flopping trips, and this is kind of one of the first post-flop things I learned in Omaha8 or better, which is I wanted to make sure I included it in this video. It's just because you flop 3 of a kind doesn't really mean much, especially in a board texture like this. When you see this board and it interacts with your 4 cards, you shouldn't be thinking, oh yeah, I have 3 of a kind. The things going through my mind are there is a flush draw on the board, there's a low draw on the board, a lot of other things can change. Can my 8 make a scoop? If you think about it, you would often exchange one of your high cards for a lower card if you were able to have a low, right? Like 8, 2, 3, 4 here is a great hand because I've got trips plus an uncounterfeitable low draw for the turn, right? If I hit a 3, now I make a full house plus the nut low draw. That's a great hand. Though, absolutely, in terms of on the flop, 8, 7 is actually a better hand. Which kind of brings us to our flop equity. And a good phrase I like to kind of kick around is, there's no royalty bonuses in Omaha8 or better. Those of you unfamiliar with the royalty bonus, in Chinese poker, which is a poker variant, when you make a very strong hand like 4 of a kind or a royal flush, you get paid extra from your opponent. You win extra. It's called a royalty. I think of this often when I think of the way a lot of players play made flopped hands, right? They flop 2 pair, they flop something that is translates well to a hold'em hand, and they jam the pot as if, it's a guarantee that because I flopped it, because the 7 cards, mind you, already we've got 7, interacted, gave me a hand of this strength, I should be able to kind of jam the pot here. The question really becomes then, what is the best hand on the flop worth? Now, if we think of those 2 previous board textures that we just saw, immediately we can think of the 4-5 example I used as compared to maybe a set of aces on the ace 9-7 hand. Think of ace 2-3 on those board textures and how different the 2 of them are, right? Ace 2-3 on the one board texture is almost always safe for some sort of 8-2 or Jack 3 run out, going to have at least half the pot, or more often than not, of course, a scoop. Ace 2-3 on the 10-4-5. Of course, now we're saying, well, hey, what are the suits? In other words, in some situations, on the flop, having the best hand is going to be worth a lot, right? It's your hand is much more likely to be best, no matter what the runout is. In other situations, there's a lot more bits of equity up for grabs between you and your other opponents. These things all become a lot more important because it's always important to remember that in a limit game, we should expect a lot less folding, right? Players are going to be getting better prices on calls. Most players transition away from limit games because they don't like their hands getting cracked, right? The recreational player. So these are the types of players trying to crack your hand. Maybe think of it that way. But in general, we should expect a lot less folding, which is why these first 2 points become so much more important, specifically in 08. Now, I'd used this slide before, what is a good hand, but let's talk a little bit more about what makes a good hand on the flop. We talked about those flops in particular. First and foremost, scoop, scoop, scoop. We want to be scooping the pot, okay? Concentrating on flopping an okay draw for half of the pot or the nut draw for half the pot is not very good, right? Just only having a shot at half is okay. We're not excited about that opportunity. When we think about that in terms of our post-flop game plan, we think the spots where we want to be jamming are the spots when we want to be scooping. This then obviously gives some value to the high only hands, because some of the high only hands, when they do scoop, there's no low present, but it also removes the number of board textures that's possible for us to scoop on. So technically, the math is a little bit skewed there. But regardless, we want to be thinking about scooping. We want to be thinking about good runouts. By that I mean more plus EV runouts equals better hand. I spent a lot of time going through these board textures, changing one card in the board textures. I spent a lot of time myself shuffling a deck of cards and dealing out flops and turns and rivers and looking at them. Nervous tick maybe. But looking at runouts, thinking of the deck as 52 cards, realizing there's 4 in your hand, 3 on the flop, so we know that there's only 45 left, and there's only 2 cards left to come. Thinking of what's going to come, how our hand is going to interact with those cards, which of those cards are going to give us scoop possibilities, which of those cards are going to turn our hand from a check raise into a check fold. I'm really kicking that 4-5 today, but these are great ways to be thinking about our post-flop game plan. These are the kind of things I think about at the table that when, I want to get better, these are the kind of things that drive me, the kind of questions I try to answer, the kind of things I talk about with my poker friends. How should I be playing these cards and things like that? And finally, basically one of the paramount value situations, one of the jamming, when do I want to go infinite bets? When do I want to be putting a third bet in? When do I be putting a lot of extra money is opportunity for domination is always going to be super plus EV in any poker game, but particularly when it comes to 4-card games, looking for situations where you can potentially be trapping players when you're dominating their flush draws, or you have better low draws, and no players are not going to be folding. These are just great spots where we want to be pushing. In other words, situations where we know we have a range edge are great situations that make very good hands. So I hinted a little bit about high-only board textures, and I wanted to cover one this week as we kind of wrap up this intro to flop play. So I did King Jack 8 Rainbow. Let's talk a little bit about this flop. First, this flop obviously favors high card hands, right? I kick the 9 quite a bit. Now, on this board texture, of course, Queen 9, 9, 10 are straight draws, yes. But I always like to look at King Jack and Queen Jack and King Queen as good examples of board textures where Ace 10 is just so far and far ahead of Ace 9, because this is a flop where if I did have a hand like Ace 10 with backdoor hearts and some backdoor lows, I'm actually feeling pretty good about my hand. But that being said, this flop in general does favor high card hands. I talked a lot in the pre-flop section about how high card flops generally favor fold equity. Now, one important thing to keep in mind of this board texture, though, is there is an 8, and 8 means backdoor low. The more you play Omaha 8 or better, the more shocked you will be with the type of hands players want to call one bet with on the flop. And I say that like it's a bad thing, and I hope you realize when I say it on that level, it's the complete opposite. Like calling with hands that can potentially like backdoor into a bad straight, but never really turn decent equity is not a good situation, right? Think about this board texture, King Jack 8 with 4, 5, 6, 7 up against Ace 2, Queen Jack. So 4, 5, 6, 7, Ace 2, Queen Jack. And the 4, 5, 6, 7 calls the flop bet. Now, if the 4, 5, 6, 7 was to turn a pair and make some sort of nice wrap, yes, there would be back runner trip outs the player could make, but any other card, like technically the 9, yes, there are some really good backdoor runs. I hope that I'm not getting too hypothetical here, but almost every run that hand has, okay, is going to put a low up there. So you're actually backdoor drawing for half the pot. But players will call, and they will absolutely call and hope that their hand could occasionally be best. So as much fold equity as I am expecting, the reason why I really hammer home the whole plan for the turn issue is because you need to be accounting for when the backdoor low draw comes in, and we'll talk about this when we get onto the turn, but when the backdoor low draw comes in, or starts to come in rather, versus when it doesn't. And a lot of things happen when it misses because suddenly now the board is either paired or there's a high card. So there's a lot that changes on a board texture like this from the flop to the turn. There's a lot that can go either way. And we'll talk about that more, obviously, as we shift over to the turn. What raises on a board texture like this? And we can kind of bunch this in the what to expect, right? I kind of hinted that you can expect a lot more speculative peeling than you are going to give players credit for. Now, I always feel funny when I say stuff like that because it could sound like I'm maybe trying to be clever or, mock someone's bad play. And by no means is that the case, right? As much as, compared to what most people will say to you in online chat, who really cares what we say about people politely in a video. But what calls the flop is a very real part of what we're playing against on the turn. In other words, if it's a hand I'm considering in my opponent's flop calling range, I need to be planning for it on the turn. So on a board texture like this, I'm expecting the very, very worst players to really be folding very, very rarely. It doesn't matter much, truth be told, because we'll be fine on the turn, as we'll see. But most of the time, I'm expecting a little bit more straightforward play on a board texture like this, right? Specifically from our early position raising range, we're in not that bad of a shape, right? Even if we have a hand like ace queen or ace 10, let's remember, again, I've talked about the kind of downsides of being in a limit game and that, people are always going to be priced into calling. But that's what we're actually playing it for, right? Now someone can't price me out with my gut shot and backdoor low because there's equity there still. Equities run close on the flop, pre-flop in Omaha8 or better. And a big part of why we need to be preparing for runouts is because they run a lot closer than people think post-flop as well because of the presence of low draws, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a board texture that's pretty good for our open raising range. In general, what raises is a good question. I think it's the kind of board texture you can expect a few players to get a little bit feisty on. So a board that maybe I myself might get some stubborn on, but that's a big part of why we're so selective with our preflop raising range too, because again, most of anything that we're playing actually has a bit of a piece here. So if someone raises, we can call and play poker on the turn and or river. So as we did earlier, let's change a couple of cards here. And what happens if I change the king from a king to an 8, now pairing the 8? Believe it or not, even though there is a backdoor low still on this board texture, in my experience, I find that players are a little bit more happy to fold quickly on a paired board with their naked backdoor lows, under pair type things. If you think about it, one of the fallacies or one of the kind of illusions of Omaha is that it's kind of easy to make straights just because you get 4 cards, etc. So sometimes that does contribute to players being a little bit more stubborn post-flop and calling a little bit more. And the idea of drawing to a straight, which could potentially be the nuts, i.e. on a king jack 8, if it went turn 6, river 4, is appealing to some players. But on a board texture like this, maybe they feel a little bit more comfortable folding. Kind of try to give some population reads out just so players are, you as the audience are a little more comfortable as you're jumping into the games. Raises are a lot more polarizing on a board texture like this, right? Players are typically representing a strong made hand in 8x, or they are, bluffing, or and even in a 4-card game to be raising queen 10 or 9-10 is a lot closer to pure bluffing, just because of the probability of someone actually having an 8 being higher, given that we have 4 cards. This would be one of the drier board textures, right? Were we to bump up the 8s to 9s, it's one where almost, no action should be expected. One, I'm actually probably continuation betting a good amount and just expecting to potentially take the pot down. And that makes sense, right? If I'm expecting players to be kind of fit or fold, as possible as it is for someone to have an 8, if this is a heads-up situation, I will certainly take my odds on a continuation bet. Again, some limit basics there. If I raise and get cold called and the big blind folds, I'm getting 5.5 to 1 on a continuation bet, which is a pretty good price. A player folding 1/3 of the time is going to be great for us, right? Now, a lot of that changes when we change that jack to the 9 of hearts. Of course, there's heart draws now on board. In general, though, I would still consider this a little bit on the drier side. Yes, there are heart draws, but it's still a polarizing board texture, right? It's not one that players can jam very often. It's not one that I think players are going to be comfortable check raising us very much on. It's polarizing in that someone putting more money in on it is representing a stronger hand than just a draw because of the possibility of trips. Doesn't mean it's necessarily correct, but it's just really the way a lot of players kind of approach this type of situation. Okay, so just kind of a wrap-up review, I want to talk a little bit about preflop ranges and how those, specifically in the context of how you're playing Omaha 8 or better, interact with our post-flop game plan. Because I think the more you find yourself in difficult post-flop situations, you can walk yourself even further back to pre-flop. This is, really how I approached the game. As I tried to get better and better, the more I played 08. And without further ado, let's just dive in. So how does our pre-flop play prepare us for the post-flop situations we're going to find ourselves in? Well, first and foremost, we want to make sure that we can c-bet a good amount from early position. Or we want to make sure that we flop good equity a lot, essentially is what I'm saying here. But in reality, what it's done for us post-flop is set us up in a lot of situations where if we bet, our opponents can expect to bet again a lot on the turn, which is important in limit, right? It gives them a less of an incentive to peel with some of their bad hands. Also, against those it doesn't really matter against the players who are just calling it doesn't matter, we have strong hands, so we get a lot of value. From out of position, we want to make sure that the hands we're playing are scoopable hands. I guess hands that are capable of scooping. Scoop-able hands would be the way I would hope that is pronounced. This is very easy to do with our early position raising range, right? And even our late position raising range, it's not as difficult because we're expecting less players in the pot with us because we're opening from late position, which means the quality of hand we need is lower when there's fewer players in the pot. This is something we need to keep in mind when we're pricing ourselves in or avoiding the fact that we're potentially priced in at a position, right? We could call, but when we're planning to continue post-flop with a hand like 7, 8, 8, 9, we want to make sure it's on a board texture where that hand can actually scoop. Especially when there's a lot of players in the pot, because it's a lot more likely someone else is going to have the best hand, something close to the best hand. So when there's a low out there, someone's going to have it. It doesn't mean you're not going to have situations where you put player A on a low or player B on a low, or hey, even player C on a low, and you all flip your cards up and no one has a low. But this is something we're going to keep in mind as we see situations where we are priced into a pre-flop call and maybe kind of seem like we're priced into a post-flop call, but in reality, it's not even close. And what I mean by all of this put together is we want to avoid compounding errors. Now, what good does this do this in terms of, I thought we were talking about preparation, right? I thought we were talking about the things we did already. Why are you telling them, don't make more mistakes? So as you play, as you try to improve yourself as a poker player, it's always good to note the times when you feel like you don't know what you're doing, right? When you feel confused, when you feel like something's off. I remember the first time this happened for me in Omaha 8 or better, and it was when I realized that I had way too many 7 and 8s in my button opening range, three-handed in a tough match. This was a very long time ago in Poker Stars, but I'm not sure if you've ever had aha moments in poker, but when they come up, I can often remember where I was when they happened. Anyway, when you find yourself in tricky turn and river situations, and even more, as we're talking about now, flop situations, think about how you got there. Think about if that situation was correct in the first place. Sometimes it can be an absolute error. In other words, maybe you defended the big blind from an under the gun open with Queen 9-9-4 rainbow. That is just a solid mistake. That is never a playable hand when someone open raises. So I would just go ahead and fold there. Or it can be a subjective error. Maybe you opened ace 5, 5, 7 from the cutoff when two very loose aggressive players that you knew were going to 3-bet you a lot were behind you. And that could have been a fold there in that situation then, because they're going to pounce on you and that hand's not that strong. Regardless, a lot of times in our post-flop errors or our post-flop kind of conundrums, we can find pre-flop mistakes. So don't hesitate to kind of wind it back from there. Yeah. Hopefully this was a good introduction to flop play in Omaha 8 or better. I wanted to cover just the kind of basics of what makes a good flop, what to kind of expect on certain board textures. And from here, we're going to look at kind of a compartmentalized look at our strategy from different seats, given other things, right? So as the pre-flop raiser, how should we be continuing post-flop? And as someone who defended, how should we be continuing post-flop? And talk about formulating our plan for the turn. Any questions, please feel free to post them here on the forums. Until next time, this is Chuck for DeucesCracked.com, and I'll see you at the tables.